I want to thank Anouk. I want to thank the organizers for hosting yet another terrific, high-quality conference. I was at the one in Ottawa last year. This one was better, Anouk. Just, another step above, high-quality attendees, panelists, and really good discussions. And I'm really excited about the panel that we put together with you for you today. So we'll get into that, but I want to give you just a little bit of what ERA is doing in this province. And then I'm going to be very excited to introduce Jan de Wol, General Manager of Calgary District Heating, Kevin Noble, Director of Distribution Planning at Fortis Alberta, and Ted Vogel, the Governing Council of the Caribbean Alliance for Sustainable Tourism, to give you a bit of a sense of some real live decentralized energy projects that are on the ground operating as we seek, both within Alberta and what's going on in the Caribbean right now, and give you a sense of their challenges, their opportunities, and how to make these things happen, the critical role of policy and regulatory and so forth. We'll get into it in just a moment. But I want to start with a story. So back in 2017, there were a few entrepreneurial geologists sitting in a basement in Calgary. And yes, entrepreneurial geologists do exist. So they were trying to figure out how to get an idea that they had of how to make geothermal work a little bit more effectively than it had been in their landscape, and get that idea funded in something that really couldn't be proven in a lab. So they needed investors for this project in the field, to get their project in the field. And back in 2019, Emissions Reduction Alberta supported a pilot project with this company in Rocky Mountain House, you see it there before you, that gave a chance for those investors to see the technology in action. We provided $1 million for them to facilitate drilling rigs, drilling technology, and the development of a sustainable zero-emission energy alternative. Now, 4 years later, Ever Geothermal has commenced drilling in Germany for a $300 million pilot plant that is going to heat 100,000 homes. They have just been awarded a contract with the Department of Defense in the U.S. To provide geothermal heat and power to an Air Force base in Texas. And they were the first recipients of the Canada Growth Fund's investment, a $15 billion program that was announced a couple of weeks ago for a $90 million placement by the federal government. So look at the success that company in Calgary achieved within 6 years. It is possible. It's not done a lot, but it's possible. Alberta has been a leader in renewable energy development in Canada, and not a lot of people know that. You all know that, but we need to get the story out. We've heard it a bunch of times today and yesterday. Alberta has a bit of a branding problem. Last year, 17% of our power came from wind and solar, exceeding the province's goals for that year of 15%. There are another 15 renewable projects before the Utilities Commission, and more than 90 in various stages of development. And since 2019, corporate renewable energy deals in Alberta have supported $4.7 billion in new capital investment. And I'm going to make this prediction. Come March, we again will lead the country in renewable energy development. So there are a number of forms of energy that are relevant to our system, not just the areas of wind and solar. We've heard a lot about other forms in this conference. And there's a time and a place for all of those energy systems. It takes a portfolio. There is no silver bullet, and we need to have a portfolio approach. I'm not going to touch on it too much, but my panelist, Kevin, is going to come and talk a little bit more. But this is a picture of the Waterton Energy Storage Project that Fortis Alberta has completed, and it supplies energy to more than 500,000 customers Fortis supplies energy to 500,000 customers in central and southern parts of the province. So the town of Waterton is prone to higher than normal outages, and it is a long distance from the nearest substation. And of course, the natural terrain in that beautiful area poses some challenges. So they've devised a first-of-kind battery storage system in Waterton Lakes National Park TAN site that's been fully operational since the fall of last year. A microgrid meant to transfer the community to battery supply when needed. And as you can imagine, power outages have a huge impact on summer-only businesses and can greatly affect the tourist experience. So this technology solution improves grid reliability for residents, businesses, and visitors. And we at ERA were pleased to support that project. And I look forward to Kevin talking to us a little bit more. So let's go to Northern Alberta. ATCO Electric serves a lot of remote communities located hundreds of kilometers from the main electrical grid. Communities that have relied on costly and carbon-intensive diesel power generation for decades. And as an example, they operate 2 diesel plants that supply the remote communities of Indian Cabins and Steen River with electricity. These sites are located 150 kilometers and 175 kilometers just north of high level, so really far north. ATCO completed feasibility studies for installing renewable generation and battery energy storage at each location. And with our support at ERA, they were able to create 2 renewable hydrocarbon hybrid microgrids. These projects are going to supplement the existing diesel power generation with solar and reduce diesel use by more than 60%. This will lead to increased energy reliability. While not ERA funded, ATCO and its Fort Chipewyan Indigenous partners also installed the largest off-grid solar and storage microgrid project in Canada. Again, reducing the community's microgrid or reliance on diesel generation. That project reduced diesel by 25% and eliminated over 2,000 tons of emissions per year and does not increase rates. It improves air quality and reduces noise. These microgrid projects, big and small, ERA funded or not, are making a real difference in isolated communities. And it's showcasing how industry and Indigenous communities can work together to develop sustainable and renewable energy solutions. So strategic partnerships are very important, and perhaps none other than with our Indigenous communities and organizations. Just outside Medicine Hat, a new project is creating an innovative path for economic reconciliation. Elemental Energy has partnered with Cold Lake First Nations, giving them equity interest in the Chapice Lake Solar Energy and Storage Project. This is a 15-megawatt project with a DC-connected flow battery. The First Nation is going to benefit from capacity building and employment opportunities and a new sector of strategic interest for the community. And the project will enable the First Nation to meaningfully invest and participate in the province's transition to clean energy, while maintaining employment and economic opportunities within local workforce and the wider provincial economy. Indigenous equity participation is important. So this brings me to the notion of leveraging the skills and abilities of the workforce. We had an excellent panel yesterday talking about the workforce and our skills. And Alberta has and needs to continue playing on its strengths to be successful in our net zero transition. Tapping into the tremendous talent of Alberta's workers continues to build on that long-standing career in the energy industry that many of our citizens have. ERA has funded a pump hydro storage project in southern Alberta with technology that stores energy and water underground to complement renewable energy projects. We heard about an interesting water storage project with Keith this afternoon as well. This energy is released when the grid needs power, and because of its subsurface, it's building on the innovation and technical expertise of Alberta's oil and gas industry, just like we showed with Ever Geothermal. At the same time, it's helping to solve key challenges with renewable energy that needs reliable and long-term energy storage. Alberta is becoming the place where bright minds and big ideas come together with an unmatched spirit to help solve global challenges. When people see that this province is the place to be, when we get the economics right, the investment flows. The pursuit of net zero is going to significantly boost jobs and GDP in this province beyond a business as usual scenario. And to meet this opportunity, we're going to need to invest billions of dollars a year in clean tech over the next 30 to 40 years. And this is going to create tremendous opportunities in digitization, electrification, energy efficiency, hydrogen production and utilization, carbon capture, utilization and storage. So much of this process builds on what we're doing already and what we're really good at doing. And a big part of Alberta's success is its farther advanced policy space than many other jurisdictions. And you may quibble about that, but when you look at the US's policy space on carbon capture and utilization and you compare that to Alberta's, we are leaders. Methane reduction is another excellent one. The map that Jonathan just showed, there's a lot of bright spots in the US and not as many bright spots in Alberta because of our ability to reduce methane in significant fashion. So since 2009, ERA has been operating. How many of you know that Alberta was the first jurisdiction in Canada to put a price on carbon back in 2007? It seems prescient now that we have, since 2009 as emissions reduction, taken some of that funding that's been collected from the high emitters, from the carbon emissions tax, and we've allocated $900 million to 261 projects worth $7.3 billion. It's also important to note that we require a one-to-one investment in the private sector. This isn't just 100% government grants we're giving out. Private sector has to have skin in the game. Historically, we have seen much more so than a one-to-one matching. We're very proud about our 7.7 to 1 leverage ratio. So for every dollar we've invested, we've seen $7 plus invested. Now take heart, emerging innovators. On average, on more recent projects, it's more like 3 to 1. So don't think you need $7 or $6 to put in for our projects. But our investments are putting people to work. Job creation is critical. We have modeling that suggests that our investments will generate over 33,000 person-year jobs by 2025 and contribute $4.9 billion to the provincial gross domestic product. Later this year, we're going to be adding to these numbers as we announce the winners of the Reshaping Energy Systems funding call that we posted several months ago, and expect this news in early December. This investment from the Government of Alberta through the TIER Fund will advance technologies focused on the transportation, distribution, storage, and optimization of energy use. It will reduce emissions, create economic opportunities, and enable a more resilient, efficient, and reliable energy system. The finalists are now actually presenting to our evaluators, and we're making funding decisions that will go to our board in a couple of weeks. We're very excited about that. The other news is that we launched a few weeks ago an Emerging Innovators Funding Challenge. This is a $40 million funding challenge for small and medium-sized businesses. What's interesting to know about ERA is we don't have to be bound to invest just to Alberta companies. We can invest in any company in the world, proviso they demonstrate that technology in Alberta, and they reduce the emissions in Alberta, and they create jobs in Alberta. Technology does not have borders, and so this allows us access to tremendous deal flow and expertise and talent within the province, and we've seen huge benefits and successes with that. So hitting our environmental and economic goals is not a single-threaded problem. It takes a combination of innovation, the people in the garage, and the policymakers to drive the change. ERA invests public money, and our mandate is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and create economic growth. And we do this, we are driven by the goals and outcomes set by the province. So earlier this year, the province put forward the Environment and Responsible Energy Development Plan. It builds on a long history of provincial actions and accomplishments to reduce emissions. And it establishes as a goal for the province the goal to reach net zero by 2050. At the same time, industry is beginning to change their behavior and not only decrease their environmental impacts, but try to remain competitive in their productions and in their manufacturing. And we are looking for industry for ways to do what they do, but do it better. And we have to keep in mind, what are the solutions? And balance is about finding the sweet spot. So we have a very deliberate approach at ERA. How can we help you achieve these outcomes? What are the challenges you have? The desire is how to improve to do things while remaining competitive in a low-carbon world. There's so much work happening in this province right now on all fronts in clean technology that we lead by far in this country. And we need to be proud of that, but we also need to make aware of what's happening so we can get on board and support its development. That's why it's really important for us to keep our eyes on the future trends that will shape this province in the next 10 to 15 years. And it's a massive challenge that we need to make to substantially reduce our emissions in order to address climate change and ensure our industry remains competitive and a reliable supplier of energy. So our job at ERA is, in partnership with those we fund, is to push the status quo. And when you do that, there's always new boundaries to explore. It's crucial we continue to push those boundaries and create the future we want for this province. It's time for us to dominate the new economy. Thank you very much.
All right, let's move to the first slide. So we thought we'd just put together a few slides. You know, I'm not sure how many folks here are from Calgary, but we're in constant introduction mode. Here's the downtown core, of course. The fuchsia is our pipe network. So we actually have about 6.5, 7 kilometers worth of pipe. We've got a cogen unit that we run flat out. And some natural gas boilers. And so what we're going to show you over the next couple slides is how a lot of these buildings that you're seeing in the downtown core, and Justin and I were talking about this over lunch, they're owned by, you know, our favorite oil and gas firms that provide such, you know, valuable employment to Calgary. And, you know, what we're finding is they are driving the adoption of district energy and some of the carbon reduction that I'm going to tell you about. And so it's not necessarily a policy-rich environment yet in Calgary, but we're seeing some great adoption rates. So our carbon reduction path. So the project that we're going to talk a little bit about is the e-boiler and solar project that you see there. That one is active. A little bit more information on the next slide. Hydrogen, we're actually doing a hydrogen pilot next week with the City of Calgary and TC Energy. In our existing boilers, we're blending hydrogen there to prove out the concept. Sewer heat recovery is huge. That's going to be about 2025 for us. We've got to have that, and that's coupled with heat pumps. You know, these are tried and true technologies in other jurisdictions, and we're getting there. And ERA funding, you'll see, is very key. So in total, we're going to see with the ERA project that we're talking about, which again is the e-boilers, about $15 million in total investment, of which ERA has funded or will fund about $6.5 million for 6 megawatts of e-boilers. And to just put that in context, that's a couple of major high-rises in downtown that will heat. And then coupled with that, I didn't mention it off the start, is District Energy, and that's the building in the middle there. It's actually owned by Atlantica Sustainable Infrastructure. And along with this, we're vertically integrating and have just acquired a solar development in the area of Provost. And so what we've heard from our customers, and we talk about market-driven adoption, and again, these are from the boardrooms of Canada's major Fortune 500 companies, is we want truly traceable green energy and green heat, and the least we can do is heat our buildings with carbon-free heat. And you know, to that end, they're not price sensitive. We know how expensive electricity is, and this is just a very significant shift that we're seeing, very, very positive. So ERA funding, $6.5 million. Electric boilers along with thermal storage, and that's our project, resulting in, on the right-hand side there, about GHG reduction of about 12,000 tons per year.
All right, we're going to go over to Kevin. Kevin is with Fortis Alberta and is going to talk to us a little bit more about the Waterton storage project.
Yeah, thank you. So just briefly, Fortis Alberta, who we are. So we're a distribution-only company, wires-only company in Alberta. So a bit unique from a lot of utilities that we don't have a transmission arm or generation arm, purely a wires owner. So serve roughly the southern half of the province. Rural Alberta is largely between ATCO and Fortis Alberta. ATCO more so being the north and us more so being the south. We have just over 600,000 customers, operate 129,000 kilometers of distribution line, over 1 million poles. So quite extensive, about 60% of Alberta's entire distribution system by wire kilometers, I believe is how that measure comes from. And then we deliver 17,000 gigawatts a year. But it's probably enough for the company if you want to move to the next. So the Waterton Energy Storage Project. So we're always looking to ensure that our customers and communities get equitable service. Clearly, if you're closer to the centers, you'll probably have higher reliability than the rurals. But we always had an issue. We looked at the kind of outliers at the edge of our grid, and reliability that they experienced was lower than the system average. So looked for a solution how to address that. So Waterton, you can see on the map, way down southwest corner of the province, so really hemmed in by mountains on many sides, the states to the south. Served from a distribution line out of the Glenwood substation. So it's 79 kilometers from Glenwood, line kilometers from Glenwood down to Waterton. So very rural. If anyone's been in southwest Alberta, very windy down there, crosses a few ridges. It really just gets in the proper mountains as it approaches Waterton, but some high ridges down there, a lot of lightning strikes. So they definitely saw much higher outages, both by duration being quite remote. The service point is in Pincher Creek. You can see north part of the map. So they're the better part of an hour just to get down to Waterton once they get mobilized. The next closest substation is Shell Waterton, serves a bit of a local load in the area, largely a gas plant. So a traditional solution for a community that had poor reliability, number one is to harden the grid. So you go out, you look at the line, the condition of the line, you rebuild, reinforce where required. And that'll save you outages, but doesn't eliminate them, and it doesn't provide a backup option. So the traditional solution would be to build a second line from Shell Waterton substation down, but very expensive for Waterton. It's very seasonal, so very business oriented in summer, but I'm actually going down this weekend, and there's like 2 restaurants and 2 hotels open and not much else. It's a bit of a ghost town in the winter. So started to look at other solutions of what we could possibly do for that, and battery energy storage solution is kind of what came to mind. So reached out to ERA, Alberta Innovates, got the project proposed and kicked off, and they were really kind of walked us through the whole process. Were a big part is funding and just support for the project. So what we ended up with for a solution is that we installed a battery in the park's maintenance yard just outside of the town site, paired with solar. So the battery's 1.3 megawatts, good for 4 hours at that. And that's enough to address, like I said, a 4 hour at what is predicted to be the Waterton peak. It's a bit lower than that now, but will grow over time, and it's essentially a 20-year life for the battery. So wanted to make sure it's sized efficiently, or sufficiently. And then paired it with solar. So we wanted to have reliability of town. We also wanted to prove the integration of essentially a microgrid. So you have a battery, you have solar, you have the microgrid control systems, and just how those are integrated, and one controls the other. So next.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And we will now hear from Ted Vogel, who is with the Governing Council of the Caribbean Alliance for Sustainable Tourism, to talk a little bit about what's going on in the Caribbean around decentralized energy.
Thank you. So CAST is the Caribbean Alliance for Sustainable Tourism, as you probably all know, or may not know. It's a 501c3. It's affiliated with the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association. So why is a 501c3 up here talking about decentralized energy? Part of what we do is we educate hoteliers across multiple islands and multiple countries that are all members of the Hotel Association about energy efficiency, renewables, and other environmental impact factors such as sargassum risk and Zika education, that bad thing that happened before COVID. RMI is another component within this whole mashup. So CHTA and RMI have been in a conversation for about a year to create tranches of fundable projects from the end user side of things. So this would be maybe not prosumer or super prosumer in a sense. We're actively working with CHTA in the Bahamas and Jamaica to create tranches of projects in the 3 megawatt or $6 million range. This is going to be funded by entities in places like Wall Street or Bay Street. The idea behind that is to actually leverage solar to lower cost of energy, and also to introduce other technologies in phase two, higher penetration energy efficiency and renewables. The project in the Bahamas, the idea behind that that they're currently working on is mostly governmental entities. So they currently have a tender that's going out on that. I think it's supposed to be this month. Owen might be able to fill you out in a little more on that. We also have a program in the Bahamas. The big difference between those two projects so far is that those were IDB connected, they were governmental financing connected, and the projects that I'm going to be working on in this next level of things is going to be more on the street financing. The idea being we can aggregate a 100-room hotel or a 1,600-room resort, and we can get cost per kilowatt down to hopefully under $2.25 a watt installed. Everything would be lease-based, cash flow positive on day one. The big issue with what we have and what we're trying to do as far as investing in sustainability is from an end user perspective, we run into a lot of issues about the data that they have or they think they have, the data that they don't have, the data that they think they understand, and the data that they don't understand. So there's a lot of known knowns. The energy costs are too high. The known unknowns are everything from, can I put solar on my roof? Will a solar panel stick to the roof of a Butler building in a Category 5 hurricane? So there's a lot of things that have to be understood. And this is where RMI will come in from a technology and lessor agnostic standpoint. Surveys will be done, economic feasibilities will be looked at, sizes of systems will be done, and then we'll actually come back with an economic equation that can take into account the best package to save the end user the most amount of money. Am I selling anyone a hybrid system? Am I selling anyone a microgrid? No. But what we are able to do is baby step our way into those types of applications where you can offset some of your energy, you can decrease your OpEx, you can put money in your pocket, and to some extent you could also shelter critical loads. So server room, refrigeration is a key thing in the Caribbean. I mean, nobody wants a 40,000 square foot freezer with $500,000 worth of food in it to go bad. It smells terrible. But all of those things will move people down the road towards eventual adoption of higher penetration capabilities and higher offset of energy. The last thing within this matrix, though, too, is I think that there is an ability within this to build in Canadian participation. There are a ton of smart people. There's a ton of people that know about remote, decentralized grids, austere operations. Things that can be learned in Canada can be directly translated to the Caribbean and vice versa. So Owen is going to be the project manager for the microgrids in Saba and the microgrid in North Caicos, which is partnering with Fortis. And if you have ideas, if you have verifiable products, if you have capabilities, analytics, anything that can help us leverage relationships to get better products and smarter solutions, please come to us and we will do the same in kind. If we learn things that can help you, we're all in. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. So who wants a project in the Caribbean? Anyone? Yeah, especially the next couple of months. All right. So each of you have been involved integrally in developing a big decentralized energy project. I'm sure each of you encountered challenges in getting that project deployed. What were some of the big challenges you had as you initiated, developed, and then operated these facilities, and how did you overcome them?
Okay, I'm first in line. You know, in Calgary, we run a private district energy system, which means we need to be competitive. And so that means all the way from civil construction, we need to put pipe down, that fuchsia kind of network you saw there. That's the most expensive part of district energy, actually. It's not the generation or even just the operation of the facility, it's the pipe. And so that's the big challenge. So when we can come to ERA, for instance, and we can reduce our capital costs for new technology in e-boilers, that's a major barrier that's broken down, because we can offer that heating product to buildings at a much more competitive price. And it is truly competitive. What each of these individual buildings is doing downtown is they're first looking at, you know, upgrading their building envelopes. They're looking at, can I get electricity to my building and just do it myself cheaper? And in Calgary, some of the major buildings, the answer to those questions has been millions of dollars. And so we can truly start to leverage district energy through, funding from the ERA. It really jettison ourselves forward about 15 years in comparison to other district energy systems and begin to offer this product. And so that's a huge leg up for us, a huge challenge to overcome.
You want to see the capital cost of the pipe?
So the pipe in downtown Calgary, and right now we're actually doing a major construction project with LRT line. It's about $15,000 per meter. So it's extremely expensive. So and just to put it in context, Calgary's about 10 years old, our system. Vancouver goes back to the 1960s. We have 22 buildings. They've got about 215. That's just the downtown system. Toronto has about 250. And so that was done when, infrastructure was likely a little bit cheaper. So we're fighting capital costs. So yeah, thanks for, having me admit that. But the bottom line is we're able to overcome that and still provide a competitive product.
That's great.
So for us, for the Waterton project, I'd say that the challenges fell into two different buckets. Being a regulated utility, the regulatory side is always a challenge for something new like this, and then the technology side, of course. So from technology, we essentially had 4 vendors and 4 products that we were looking to integrate. So we had the battery itself, which we sourced. We went competitive RFP, but ended up sourcing it from a Calgary company. And then the inverter was part of the battery package, but they got that from another company. So kind of two components there, being the battery and the inverter. And then we actually partnered with Opus One Solutions. They were part of our funding application with us since day one of the project. They were the microgrid control supplier. They've been bought by GE, I think, since. But they were a startup out of Toronto, a Canadian startup. And then the fourth was the solar. So we went to competitive bid for the solar as well. But then the control of the inverters from the solar had to integrate with the microgrid controller, which had to integrate with the battery and that inverter. Plus, I guess the fifth being the protection of our systems, our reclosers and our system switches had to all integrate. So certainly a challenge there. And then we also found with inverters, and protection schemes, they were largely planned around a balanced system, so more commercial operation where your phases tend to be balanced, whereas Waterton we saw very much the opposite. It all depends on the time of year, how much loading is on each line of the 3-phase system. The campground was on 1 phase, so in camping season, that phase would be quite highly loaded, and off camping season, it would be quite lightly loaded. So challenges there from the technical side. And then with the regulator, there's a bit of a black hole in the regulation right now in Alberta about ownership of batteries, being addressed through Bill 22, but when we were applying for this, it was 2018, 19, I want to say we went to the regulator, so Bill 22 wasn't proposed or in it. Well, it's still not enforced, but no details around that. So we had to, first of all, we went to the ISO to essentially get their buy-in, because there's a market issue too, right? Like we're not looking to operate in the energy market or disrupt the energy market. So we went to the ISO, explained the project that would only be exporting to the grid during outages when we weren't grid connected. And then took that to the AUC, and the AUC process was actually quite smooth. They approved it, with conditions that if we're going to change the function of the battery or affect the energy market at all, that we'd have to go back to them. But went surprisingly smoothly for that application on a pilot basis, and very clear that this was a one-time approval because the regulations weren't in place. But that would be a bit of a summary of the challenge we faced.
Great, thank you. Ted? There's no challenges in the Caribbean, are there?
A few. So I would say overcoming the past is probably one of the primary considerations. In 2009 timeframe, I walked into an operations office at Sandals Resorts International. There was about 15 linear meters of bookshelves, and they were covered with proposals from consultants. And it was dishwashers and water and low flow toilets and energy savings and so on and so forth. And the guy that I was meeting with went through and he was like, yep, that one sucked, that cost $100,000, didn't save us a dime, and just had all of this thing. So there's a bit of a stigma in the Caribbean of the off Ireland like angel, the person that's going to come and save you. And there's a lot of stigma around that. So that's problem number one. You have to overcome that. You have to build relationships. One of the things that is super attractive from the RMI perspective is they build local capacity. They have local advocate. They hire someone that's on island. So if you have a problem, you've got a phone number, you've got a door you can knock on. So that's super important. The other side of the equation in looking at all of this is understanding where the money's coming from. So in DC, we have an expression called being a Beltway bandit. So there's lots of think tanks, and they do some amazing work, but they're all the way up here. And they'll come to projects in the Caribbean, and they'll promote good thinking, and they'll do a lot of education, but they probably end up spending about 20 cents on the dollar in country. Everything else leaves. They've got off-island subject matter experts. So if you can step out of that, and you can get into real investors that are looking for real returns, and not necessarily, gobsmacking returns, but I mean, one of the resort groups I've dealt with in the Caribbean in 2014 had a 9-figure electric bill. One of the properties we're considering looking at right now is a municipality. They used 135 million kilowatt hours last year at 42 cents. So finding solutions to do things like that, when you add layers of governmental things, or you add in GTZ, or you add in USAID, it makes it a 3 to 5 year process, and very often some of the funding will dry up and it'll go away. So private solutions, people in this room with good ideas, people with access to money or people access to expertise is what's going to drive the change faster in the Caribbean, in my opinion.
That's great. Well, thank you for all of that. So you've all that been there, done that, and have some real practical expertise to apply. Let's think a little more future and globally oriented. Where do you see decentralized energy going in the next few years, both within the province and globally?
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about this over lunch. And I think, the opportunity in Alberta is really coordination through utilities, meaning we're talking to ENMAX, to Fortis. We're talking to City of Calgary Waterworks in our specific instance. There needs to be a high degree of coordination amongst utilities and a bit of a breaking down of the barriers and walls in between, so that we can all get to the end that we've been talking about here for the last couple of days, and that takes leadership for sure. So. We kind of live in our district energy world where we touch natural gas, we touch, I talked about waterworks. We're deeply involved with municipal politics, unfortunately. But the more coordination and leadership we show, the greater the rate of adoption. And I think we've made some strides there. But
we're starting to see the uptake of decentralized energy already significantly over the past few years. For distributed generation, we've more than doubled the connected to the distribution system over the last 3 years compared to the previous 30, largely solar in the last few years. So we're seeing that. We've seen a lot of interest from customers around microgrids, whether behind the meter or kind of small municipal or community-based microgrids. Still a lot of undefined what a microgrid really means, but certainly seeing that interest in the space. Like we just spun up. Utilities are, always kind of slow to adapt and very traditional, but in the last year or so, we've spun up an emerging customer solutions group to look at exactly those things. So working with municipalities, working with communities to look at solutions like that, like distributed generation, microgrids, non-wire services is a big thing that it's got the interest of the industry and the AUC. We set a rates filing or a rate approval for the next 5 years come out a month ago, and definitely talk about non-wire services in there. So I think we're already seeing the industry moving in that direction, that it's going to be looked at a much localized level and how solutions can be brought down to that, decentralized local area and how that coordinates between customers and distribution system, some behind the meter and some local grid.
Thanks. Ted?
I'm going to argue that I think from the perspective of RMI and looking more towards the Caribbean in 2050, getting the Saba microgrid and the North Caicos microgrid more on a firmer footing and moving towards implementation is going to be huge, because those are just great demonstration projects. There's Ragged Island in the Bahamas, which is a great program, but it's not nearly the size. North Caicos will be the biggest one that RMI has worked on. The thing beyond that, in my opinion, is getting people out of the mindset of 3-year returns on investing in things like efficiency at the hotel level, at the commercial and industrial level on a lot of the islands, where they can get into situations where they can lease equipment and go cash flow positive on day one. That overall will reduce loading across island grids, which will be super helpful. It'll burn a lot less diesel fuel, which means the fuel surcharge on everybody's bill will go down. So there's a lot of things along that. To me, it's more super aggressive energy efficiency would be the hallmark I would look for in the next 5 years.
Great, okay. So let's get political for a moment, shall we? What are some of the policies and regulations that need to take place in Alberta, in the Caribbean, in order to move these projects forward more fully? What are some of the barriers we currently have in our current structure that are preventing us from scaling, adopting, investing further in this area?
So where to start? So within the city of Calgary, we're linked to the success of District Energy is directly linked to our partnership with the city of Calgary, and it's a good one. But what we need is municipal policy that incentivizes developers to adopt, sustainable energy projects like District Energy. And what we find in other municipalities is, there's a hesitancy within Calgary to mandate a District Energy connection. There's a feeling that that's going to dissuade investment. But as Vancouver can show you, and as Seattle, and on, when you level the playing field across the municipality and you make the rules, equal, that all of a sudden levels the playing field. Nobody has a product, that's kind of outpriced because of some of these solutions we're talking about today. And the funny thing is development money still comes. And so there's some really positive examples of that, and we're getting there. But absolutely, municipal level policy can drive some very positive results.
Do you want to get into provincial too?
Yeah, so provincial policy, you're contributing $6.5 million, so that's good. So a lot of this trickles down from the provincial, obviously. We're obviously a gas-centric province here. We're going to be using natural gas for years to come. And the funny thing is that even in places, and I was just in Vancouver, who has just a plethora of low to no carbon technologies, they still use gas. So it shouldn't be a scary word to us. But incentivizing, provincial policy through partnership with municipalities and incentivizing that development, again, it's back to the comment I made about utilities working together. It's aligning those. Yeah.
For utilities, it's clarity, policy clarity, regulation clarity. So Bill 22 is certainly taking a step in this direction, and some of the recent rulings from the AUC are moving in this direction, but still a lot of uncertainty of, microgrids, for example, who can own what, how a return is achieved on that. Same with non-wire services. It's in the proposed Bill 22 language, but not a whole lot of clarity yet of how a utility would implement those, whether it's non-wire service or demand-side management, ownership of batteries included in there. So not a lot of clarity today of who can own that, how it can be owned, how utilities or public implement those programs, and if it is utility, how do we get incented to deliver those? So traditional utility spends capital, that's how they make the return. There's been a lot of work out of New York, Ohio, Ontario, OEB in Ontario recently has come out with papers from their commission staff kind of speaking to this need to have different capital as a service or return on OpEx expenses to incent these sort of programs to make sure that the system is as affordable and delivered as efficiently as possible. So I think that's where the big need is on the utility side of things.
Thanks.
So, Justin, the question I have is, do you want me to address American lineage politics, Dutch lineage politics, English lineage politics, or French lineage politics in the Caribbean?
Whichever is the most entertaining.
They're all very entertaining. So to me, I think the bigger overarching thing in the Caribbean is politics from the people up. If you can educate through news, press releases, local intelligence, the benefits of greening the portfolio on islands, then that is where people start talking to their politicians and asking questions. Some islands have great proactive policy leaning towards efficiency and renewables. But for instance, in Jamaica, which is the biggest power market in the Caribbean, but it's still a giant islanded, it's a giant microgrid, they have net billing in the moment. So if you put in solar and you overproduce a single kilowatt hour, you get avoided cost, which does not equal the fuel surcharge on your bill, which is usually around 15, 20 cents. If you overproduce more than 100 kilowatts at any given time, you have to have a net export license in Jamaica, which is impossible to obtain at the moment. So those are some of the things. But the best thing about that is, from the perspective of the people in this room, if they have too much solar and they're overproducing, then they need help with supervisory control. They need help with maybe saltwater batteries. Whatever it is, there's a solution to keep the benefit behind the meter and to leverage that efficiency into, eventually what will happen, I think, is you'll see enough penetration that the power company is finally going to be like, hey, we have a problem because it's all costing us money if we don't moderate our policies.
All right. So I'm going to ask one more question of this panel, and then it's up over to you, audience, if you have any specific questions you'd like to ask these learned experts here. So my question relates to your projects and the difference it's making in terms of affordability in the market. Particularly, we've heard a lot of disagreement, let's say, over the past several weeks on the economics of batteries, and would love for some of you with experience in that to weigh in on that as well. But recognizing it's different for each project in the context you're situated in, love you to talk a little bit about that affordability lens.
Mm-hmm. So I touched on it a little earlier in that in our specific project, obviously as a feedstock, electricity to e-boilers is much more expensive than natural gas. But it's very interesting when we received the funding and we kind of announced this to some of the folks we were working with downtown, we started to get a lot of interest. And, it's an old cliche, you build it and they will come. It's very interesting that when you do that, that actually happens. And so, we got lots of questions about when are you building and are you going to have enough for me? And, sign here. So it absolutely has created positive demand. And when, in our case, they look at the alternative, this is one of the most effective and economic paths to, zero carbon in heating. So there's a direct impact, undoubted. Yeah.
For the Waterton BESS application or that sort of application of kind of end-of-the-wire remote community reliability, it's a pretty clear winner for affordability because we do a direct comparison of the wires cost versus the battery or the non-wire solution cost. Not apples to apples, because a battery like a Waterton battery is good for 4 hours at peak, longer if it's off peak, or longer if the solar's on. But a battery or a wire is good for until you switch it back to normal. So certainly not apples to apples comparison, but clear affordability when. And then it gets into the question too of, so we install this battery, we own it, same as us owning a capacitor bank or a voltage regulator. But I think the next step is the non-wire service. So maybe it makes more sense for the public market to put a battery, or the private market rather, to put a battery at those locations. They can then value stack it and provide a service to us as a distribution utility, which would be even greater affordability because we're paying for 100% of the battery, utilizing a very small portion of it just when the wire is out, whereas private industry has that option to value stack it and aid affordability that much more. And again, it goes back to kind of a regulation to enable that, and then how does utilities fund that type of service?
My answer is really simple. At 42 cents a kilowatt hour, I have no problems affording batteries. I mean, it's more from the perspective of, Atlantis in the Bahamas is 3,600 rooms. They have no space to do a lot of things.
Yeah.
So that's part of the question. And then when you get to places like Ragged Island and these like fly fishing resorts in the Bahamas, batteries is the lifeblood.
Yes.
But at that same time, it's a tiny little microgrid. Yeah. So it's super expensive, but for them, it's more than 42 cents a kilowatt hour. But yeah, we can pay for batteries.
Good, thank you. So open to questions from the audience. We have one over here.
Hi, I'm Joe Peters with Arcadis. Thanks for the conversation. That's going very well. My question for Jan is about the Calgary Energy Center. So I just want to be clear, make sure that I'm saying the right things when I tell my friends about this. So I drive by the Energy Center and often see that obviously there's natural gas being burned there.
Yeah.
And so is it truly net zero, the whole operation, or am I misunderstanding that? And then the next question is, what's the role of the solar?
Right. So no, we're not, it's not net zero at this point. No, our feedstock is strictly natural gas at this point. We do have a cogen, which we use. It's about 25%. It provides about 25% of the heat offload, and that's waste heat. So during the summertime, we actually are net zero from that standpoint. It actually can run our whole grid. But no, we're at this stage we're not. We're on the path there. The solar, where that comes in is when we submitted our ERA application, we said, hey, we're going to supply these with these e-boilers with solar. And it just so happens, obviously, that Atlantic is in that business and wants to invest in Alberta. And so, it's net new solar. Is it co-located? No. But you can't co-locate a 450 acre, so you need to use the grid. And so we're integrating. And this is of direct interest to the customers that we have, the large corporate customers. It's extremely appealing for them. Even though we can buy, RECs on the market, things like that, we're directly traceable to net new solar, and that's sounding quite well with folks.
All right, I'm Glenn from Unico Power. This should be hopefully an easy one, but can any of you talk about Bill 22, because you mentioned it, Kevin. What's the path to getting that to where it's actually approved? It's kind of hard to tell when you read through the 7 readings of it or whatever it is so far.
My understanding is limited, but the rules and regulations are, I understand, quite possibly drafted, and with the premier now, I think the expectation is that it'll be reviewed to be passed in the spring session.
Right, another question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, David Ince. Yeah, I'm interested, of course, in the Caribbean. I've done quite a bit of work there, and a lot in Barbados. So I was wondering what you're thinking about in terms of going to microgrids from the distributed energy, from the renewable energy projects that we have there. How easy is that? Because I know for sure in Barbados that the batteries has caused a lot of additional angst to the consumers in terms of how much more is this going to cost me, and the regulator there is actually now struggling with a tariff around batteries, and that's a situation there. So maybe in the sense that Bahamas seems to have some success in what you're talking about, are there any things we could talk about that may be helpful to other jurisdictions? As I said, I know about Barbados, but I think there are others where we want to move in this direction, but perhaps how do we get the interest that is generated in the renewable energy to also now go towards the importance of microgrids? Because we know that they're important, but to me, I'm not seeing that, and the storage being one of the main factors.
So I think that is a super complex question, because the answer in the Bahamas is going to be different than Barbados, and than St. Kitts, and so forth. First and foremost, the thing behind that, I think, is proper intent and proper education, and that is where the PPDF fund that the Canadian government has contributed to this past October, which is the design, engineering to implementation side of things, that's part of RMI. That's going to be smart understanding of that. The other side of that is the public understanding of what it can mean. I mean, Owen was talking about this morning that they had a power outage and 2 generator failures at the hospital while someone's having an operation. If they had had a modest battery bank, maybe that would have given them an hour worth of power and an operating room that didn't go into the dark. So it's going to be incremental. If I had to put on my magic hat and predict what it will become in places like Jamaica, the larger markets, what you'll see is battery banks put in for energy savings. And then people will start to understand that those become dispatchable assets. So maybe peak load shaving can be something that can be done, because Jamaican hotels turn on their generators to shave load now. So they can use their batteries to do that. So I think it's going to be an iterative process. And microgrids are still years away in the Caribbean. You're going to get things like Saba, North Caicos, and Ragged Island. But moving to something bigger like St. Kitts and Nevis, or the bigger islands in Turks and Caicos, or St. Martin, or something like that, it's going to take a bit more work. I also think that we need to have an evolution in storage to really make it work and make it more fundable. Yeah, so if you go to the RMI website or you talk to Owen, there is an agreement that's just been signed to develop a microgrid for Saba and to develop a microgrid for North Caicos. And they're going to be great examples, because Saba has 10 meter a second wind and not a lot of area to put in assets. North Caicos has much lower wind and a lot more space. So it's going to be designs on opposite ends of the spectrum, in my opinion.
Hey, great panel discussion. I've got a question for Kevin. You had some great points about, for example, the Waterton energy storage, how there's regulatory barriers. It's maybe not getting utilized as often as it could be. We've been looking at a lot of different ways that we can enable those affordability benefits for energy storage projects. So, for example, our strategy right now is to work with the utilities that do have the flexibility to value stack, like you mentioned. But I'm curious, on your end, like, for example, when Bill 22 gets passed, do you have any plans to change how you're operating that battery? Or if not, or maybe in parallel, do you have any other, like, have you looked into some of those business models in detail about, like, maybe energy storage as a service, that maybe that project or future projects you could really get those affordability benefits?
I think the regulations can be very restrictive in utilities, that we can't do anything in the energy or ancillary services market. So that would be where a third party would come in, put a battery in, they could get the third party energy services and then contract that reliability service to forward us to the utility.
Makes sense, thank you.
Okay, one final question? Yes.
So my question also is for Kevin. As you described the project that you were working on, it seems that you did 4 different procurement. Why did you choose that option rather than going to one EPC contractor that would be responsible for procuring all the different entities and do the integration for you?
Yeah, I think that was a lesson learned. So going forward, that is the approach we would take. I mean, part of it was that we had initially partnered with Opus One through the full development, so we were committed to them as a microgrid controller. The battery was really, that was one procurement. They procured their inverters separately, so we had to deal with two manufacturers there. And then solar's kind of off the shelf. It was a bit easier, but you still need to integrate with their controller. But yeah, going forward, we would package it for sure.
Just go ahead.
The integration part of it is actually quite critical. And by having 4 separate suppliers, each of them goes into their own little corner and don't want to take responsibility. And what you ended up having to do then is argue with them and compromise in terms of getting it done. So all the projects that we do from a procurement point of view, we always advocate for one point of contact being responsible for everything and make sure that it works contractually.
Yeah, and they played together relatively well for getting commissioning and up and running. It's more issues we ran into after the fact where you have a fault and a lot of finger pointing and people calling people, and yeah, for sure.
All right, let's thank this esteemed panel for sharing their wisdom with us today. Thank you very much.